Good evening, students. Uh, Today we will discuss about genitourinary fistulas. Okay. So, what is a fistula and what is a sinus? Fistula is an abnormal communication between two or more epithelial surfaces, whereas sinus is a blind tract with opening onto one epithelial surface only, that is a sinus, whereas fistula is communication between two epithelial surfaces. Coming to genitourinary fistulas, there there could be a abnormal communication between the urinary bladder and genital tract, or between intestine and genital tract, that is rectovaginal fistula. Urinary and genital fistula example is vesicovaginal fistula, uretrovaginal fistula, urethrovaginal fistula, like that. Between the skin and genital tract, sometimes there may be a communication between the vagina and perineum. Genitourinary fistula is a abnormal communication between the urinary system and the genital tract with involuntary escape of urine into the genital tract. So worldwide 2 to 7 million women will be affected, and about 0.2 to 1% of gynecological admissions are because of these fistulas. As the urinary system and genital system are closely related embryologically, anatomically, and functionally, injury to one structure may result in the fistulas, the communications between these two systems. So there is an every chance of genitourinary fistulas as a result of obstetric complications, gynecological surgeries, and during with the result of gynecological diseases like malignancy, infections, like that. What is a urinary fistula? It is an abnormal epithelialized communication tract between the genital tract and the urinary tract. Here you can see this is uterus, cervix, and vagina. Here it is bladder. This is the neck of the bladder and urethra. This is the communication between the bladder and uterus. So this is vesicouterine fistula. Here the communication is between the bladder and the cervix. So this is vesicocervical fistula. Here the communication is between the bladder and the vagina. So vesicovaginal fistula. Here the communication is between the urethra and the vagina. So uretrovaginal fistula. Here you can see a communication between the rectum and the vagina. So this is rectovaginal fistula. And here this is a communication between the vagina and the perineum, that is the skin, outer skin. Then you call it as perinovaginal fistula. So this is the classification of genital fistulas, and you must be able to draw this diagram whenever you get a question like what classification of genitourinary fistulas. You must be able to draw this diagram. Here you can see what is this fistula, communication between the urethra and vagina, uretrovaginal fistula. This is between the urethra and bladder neck, urethra and vagina. So vesicouretrovaginal fistula. This is vesicovaginal fistula. Here it is vesicocervical fistula, cervix and bladder. Here bladder and uterus is vesicouterine fistula. If there is a communication between the ureter and the uterus, that is called as uretrouterine fistula or uretrovaginal fistula, like that. Between the communication between the ureter and genital tract also will be there. So classification of fistulas, depending upon the location, they can be classified what we have discussed. You can remember very easily. You can draw these two diagrams and you can put these communications. So between the bladder and the genital tract, vesicovaginal, vesicouretrovaginal, vesicouterine, and vesicocervical. Between urethra and vagina, that is uretrovaginal fistulas. Between ureter and vagina, or between ureter and uterus, or ureter and cervical. Then communication between the rectum and vagina is rectovaginal fistulas. So classification of genital fistulas is depending upon the number, whether they are single fistula or multiple fistula, or depending upon the level, that is whether they are high, mid or low or subpubic. And depending upon the complication, the fistulas can be classified as simple fistulas and complex fistulas. So depending upon the location, we have already discussed. Then depending upon the site, that is level of fistula, they can be classified as high fistulas, that is just juxtacervical and at the vault. After a hysterectomy, the patient may develop fistula between the bladder and the vaginal vault. So that is vault fistulas are always high fistulas. Then mid-vaginal fistula, in the middle part of the vagina, there is a fistula. Then low fistula means in the lower part of the vagina, the communication may be between the bladder neck and urethra, or urethra and segmental, partial bladder neck class may be there, or complete bladder neck class resulting in circumferential fistula. That is all around that there is loss of tissue. Then uretrovaginal fistulas is fourth type, a small fistula below the bladder neck which is incompetent. Sometimes fifth type is massive vaginal fistula, where the fistula is very large and involving all the three levels. So this is depending upon the level of fistula, the classification: high fistula, mid vaginal fistula, low fistula, then uretrovaginal fistula and massive vaginal fistula resulting in circumferential loss. Depending upon the size of fistulas: small, medium, large and extensive. Small fistula means the size of the fistula is less than 2 centimeters. That is, diameter is less than 2 centimeters. Medium fistula is between, if the size of the fistula is between 2 to 3 centimeters. Large means if it is 4 to 5 centimeters. Extensive means more than 6 centimeters. So depending upon the associated complications, they can be classified as simple fistulas or complex fistulas. Simple fistula is the size is less than 3 centimeters. Usually it is supratrigonal, that is near the supratrigonal, or post hysterectomy cases near the cuff of vagina, that is vault will be there, no? After hysterectomy, the vaginal vault will be there, no? So if it is near the cuff, it is simple fistula. And there is no history of radiation or pelvic malignancy. And normal vaginal length is there, and around the fistula there is healthy tissue is there and good access. So if these things are present, it is a simple fistula. Whereas in complex fistula, the size is more than 3 centimeters. The size of the fistula is more than 3 centimeters, and it involves the trigone of the bladder, and it is away from the cuff of vagina. And there is history of radiation or pelvic malignancy, or following CA cervix or any pelvic inflammation, it is associated with that. Then the vaginal length is shortened and scarring, excessive scarring tissue is present around the fistula. Then the dissection of the tissues will be difficult and access will be less, and it is associated with ureter and rectum. Then we call it as complex fistulas. So what are the predisposing factors for fistulas? So whenever you are evaluating a case, patient comes with dribbling of urine or involuntary passage of urine, that is a case of, that could be a case of stress incontinence or fistulas. So you have to evaluate the predisposing factors and differentiate between these things. So what are the things you ask for in the history? Any history of pelvic irradiation. Then any history of previous surgeries like cesarean section or any pelvic surgeries. The patient might have undergone cesarean sections, 2 or 3 cesarean sections, and during the surgery there may be bladder injury resulting in vesico-vaginal fistula, or after hysterectomy the patient has developed a dribbling of urine. Then it may be due to bladder injury during surgery. Then endometriosis, because of adhesions. In endometriosis, there will be extensive pelvic adhesions, and if the patient goes for surgery, there is an every chance of injuring the ring and resulting in vesico-vaginal or other fistulas. Then when there is surgery is done for pelvic inflammatory diseases, the reason is same. It will result in pelvic adhesions and diabetes mellitus. That is because of infections and associated concurrent infections, vasculopathies and tobacco abuse. In these two conditions, the healing will not be good because of decreased vascularity. These are more prone for fistula formation. Coming to etiology of genitourinary fistulas. They can be congenital and acquired fistulas. Congenital are very less common and acquired is more common. The acquired fistula can be due to obstetrical complications or gynecological diseases and surgeries, and it may be due to accidental causes, and during accidents they may develop these fistulas. So congenital malformations can be, there may be aberrant ureter and persistent urogenital sinus, so resulting in congenital genitourinary fistulas. It is mostly associated with other urinary tract abnormalities, like then as a result of accidents, like in road traffic accidents, the patient might have suffered with crush injuries in the pelvis. So these bony chips or bony fragments will perforate the bladder or urethra, and that will result in the tract formation resulting in the fistula. So in road traffic accidents with pelvic crush injuries, the bone fragments will perforate the bladder and result in the fistulas. Then sometimes there may be avulsion of the urethra and fall on a pointed object. So these are the accidental causes of fistulas. Then obstetrical causes are most common cause in developing countries. So you may get a MCQ's question. What is the commonest cause of vesicovaginal fistula in developing countries? It is obstetrical causes. This accounts for 80 to 90% of the cases, total cases of vesicovaginal fistula. What will happen in prolonged or obstructed labor? The patient is a case of cephalopelvic disproportion or with malpresentations. Then if she goes into prolonged labor and if it is not taken for, she will end up in obstructed labor. In this, the head will be jammed and the bladder trigone will be trapped between the pubic symphysis, which is bony part, and the fetal skull, which is also bony. So this trigone of the bladder is compressed in between the pubic symphysis and the head. So that will result in the decreased blood supply and ischemic tissue necrosis. So because of this ischemia, the tissue goes into necrosis, and in 7 to 10 days, there will be sloughing of these tissues. So there is an abnormal communication between these two things and resulting in the genitourinary fistulas. So in prolonged and obstructed labor, the bladder tissue will be compressed in between the pubic symphysis and the fetal head, resulting in ischemic necrosis, sloughing, and genitourinary fistulas. So how much time it will take for the development of genitourinary fistulas in case of obstetrical complications? It is usually after 7 to 10 days. If the injury to the bladder or the genitourinary system is during the surgery, she will develop the complaints immediately. Whereas as a result of obstetric complications, the fistulas will develop after 7 to 10 days. So that is the time taken for the sloughing of the avascular tissues. So this is obstructed labor. So this is the bladder. So this is the bladder, pubic symphysis and head. These two things are hard structures. So the trigone of the bladder is nipped or compressed in between the presenting part and the pubic symphysis. Compression leading to ischemia, necrosis and sloughing, resulting in fistula formation on 7th to 10th postnatal day. So there is a obstructed So there is an obstructed labor injury complex. So a short-statured woman with cephalopelvic disproportion, She will go into prolonged labor and obstructed labor. So as a complication of that, there is fetal death and fistula formation. Fistula formation, so resulting in urinary incontinence and fecal incontinence. So this complex urological injury leading to vaginal excessive vaginal scarring and stenosis, secondary infertility, chronic skin irritation, and offensive odors because of incontinence of the urine and fecal matter. So these things, these offensive odors because of urinary and fecal incontinence results in stigmatization. The patient cannot move in the society freely, resulting in isolation and loss of social support. Sometimes it may result in divorce or separation from the husband and worsening of the property and worsening of malnutrition. So this is called as obstructed labor injury complex. So woman with CPD, obstructed labor, fetal death, and the woman develops fistulas, and because of that she will develop secondary infertility, and because of incontinence, social stigmatization and breaking up of the family and worsening of poverty and malnutrition. So apart from that, obstacle causes other things like traumatic fistulas. So the fistulas may develop as a result of instrumental vaginal delivery, like difficult forceps application. During difficult forceps application, the tissues may be injured, or during destructive operations like during craniotomy, the tissues may be damaged because of the bony spicules of the fetal skull. Then during cesarean section, a woman with previous cesarean section, we are doing surgery means the bladder may be caught in the suturing line. So while suturing after the delivery of the baby, we may accidentally include the bladder tissues in the suture line. So that will cause the ischemia leading to fistula formation. So what fistula? Vesico-uterine fistula. Sometimes ligation of the main branch of the uterine vessels in cases of hemorrhage with lateral extension and broad ligament hematomas, the ureters may be damaged. Sometimes the lateral angles will be involved and there will be hematoma formation in the broad ligament. So while attaining the hemostasis, we apply the suture lines. No? So in that there is every chance of injuring the ureter. And sometimes rupture of the scar of previous cesarean section, the rupture may extend under the bladder and bladder may be opened. So in such direct traumatic injuries, the fistula and incontinence follows immediately after delivery. This you should remember. So in traumatic fistulas, the patient complains of incontinence immediately following the surgery or delivery. Whereas if it is because of obstructed labor or ischemic necrosis, the patient will develop the incontinence after how many days? It is after 7 to 10 days after the delivery. Coming to gynecological causes of genital fistulas. It may be due to operative injuries or because of gynecological malignancies or infections. So operative injuries, like in developed countries, these gynecological causes accounts for 70% of the fistulas. Whereas in developed countries, obstacle causes accounts for 80% of the fistulas. So you may get a question like, what is the commonest cause of genital fistulas in genitourinary fistulas in developed countries? It is operative injury during gynecological surgeries. So in nearly all gynecological operations, one or other part of the urinary tract is in danger. Then ureter may be at risk during total hysterectomy, radical hysterectomy, and removal of the broad ligament tumors. Then risk of urethral injury will be there during laparoscopic procedures and in the vaginal surgeries. So urethra is threatened during anterior colporrhea and during sling operations. So you can easily remember during abdominal surgeries, ureter and bladder will be at danger. Whereas in the vaginal surgeries, urethra will be at danger. So malignancies, advanced carcinoma of the cervix, vagina and bladder, there may be formation of the fistula because of direct spread. Radiotherapy, if the radiotherapy excessive misapplied radiotherapy results in fistula formation because of endarterectomy obliterans. There will be damage to the vessels resulting in ischemic necrosis and fistula formation. So it occurs as a late complication. It takes 1 to 2 years to produce such fistulas. So patient with CA cervix, she may develop fistula because of direct spread of the carcinoma. Otherwise, she may have taken radiotherapy. Because of the exposure to radiotherapy, there is endarterectomy obliterans or avascular injury to the tissues resulting in fistula formation, but this develops as a delayed complication, very late complication. It takes 1 to 2 years to produce such fistulas. Whereas infective causes like any vaginal foreign bodies or forgotten or retained pessaries and chronic granulomatous lesions like genital tuberculosis, lymphogranuloma venereum, schistosomiosis, and actinomycosis. These are the rare causes of fistula. But we commonly see old women with prolapse, UV prolapse, for whom the pessaries were kept, and that was forgotten and retained for long periods. Coming with leaking of the urine, we may see fistulas. So coming to vesicovaginal fistula. Vesicovaginal fistula is the commonest genitourinary fistula. You may get a 4 marks questions like vesicovaginal fistula, rectovaginal fistula, or ureteric fistulas. So vesicovaginal fistula is a communication between the bladder and the vagina, and this is the commonest type. Here you can see the metal catheter is passed through the urethra and is coming out through the opening in the anterior vaginal wall. This is simspeculum. So this is, they are holding the anterior vaginal wall with the Alice forceps for exposing this fistula opening. So etiology is, it is a repetition. So it can be congenital or obstacle causes or gynecological causes. In obstacle causes is CPD, prolonged labor and obstructed labor resulting in ischemic necrosis of the bladder tissues, or as a result of difficult forceps application, or these are the destructive surgeries, craniotomy with the destructive surgery where these bony spicules will perforate the bladder and resulting in perforation. Okay, or during symphysiotomy, with the symphysiotomy also there is a chance of injuring the bladder resulting in fistula formation. So what are the preventive steps during cesarean section to decrease the chance of bladder injury? To do that, we should know what are the steps where there is increased chance of bladder injury. During cesarean section, you must have seen, after entering into the peritoneal cavity, the UV fold of peritoneum is picked up, which is a loosely hanging peritoneum, and we open the UV fold of peritoneum and push the bladder down. So at that step, if the bladder is adherent to the lower uterine segment, so there is a chance of bladder injury. So bladder injury chance is there while mobilization from the lower uterine segment. Then if the lower uterine segment, they will make an incision on the lower uterine segment and stretch that to make it so that fetal head will be delivered. No, so while stretching that lower uterine segment, the extension of incision may extend downwards, and it may affect the bladder. So bladder or ureter may be included in the suture line while suturing, application of the sutures. And during repeat cesarean sections with dense adhesions, there is a risk of bladder injury. So you should be very careful during these steps during the cesarean section. So how will you evaluate a case of vesico-vaginal fistula? You should take the proper history, general and genital examination, confirmation of diagnosis by radiological evaluation and cystoscopic evaluation. So in the history, what is the classical symptom in vesico-vaginal fistula? It is continuous escape of urine per vaginum. That is true incontinence. Whereas in stress incontinence, there will be involuntary escape of urine during increased intra-abdominal pressure, like coughing, sneezing, or walking with speed like that. Whereas in true incontinence, there is continuous escape of urine per vaginum, which is the classical symptom in vesico-vaginal fistula. The patient has no urge to void the urine because the bladder is communicated with the vagina. There is continuously the urine is leaking out. So the bladder is not filling. So the patient will not have any urge to pass the urine. Whereas in ureteric fistulas, one ureter may be affected, so other ureter will be normal. So because of the ureterovaginal fistula on one side, there will be continuous escape of urine per vaginum. And as the other ureter is normal and it is entering, and the urine will be collecting in the bladder from the normal ureter, patient will have urge to avoid the urine. So by that symptom, you can differentiate between the vesico-vaginal fistula and ureterovaginal fistula. So you have to ask whether the urge to avoid the urine is present or not. So when the fistula is very small, so escape of urine will occur only in certain positions, and normally also patient. So leakage of urine following surgical injury occurs from the first post-operative day. So if it is because of surgical injury to the urinary tract during surgeries, the leakage of urine will be present from the first day of post-operative day. Whereas in obstetrical fistulas, the symptoms appear 7 to 14 days after the delivery. Urethral fistulas, which are situated high up, they may present with stress incontinence. And vesico-cervical and vesico-uterine fistulas, they may remain continent because at the uterine isthmus, they may hold the urine. If the fistula is at the level of vesico-cervical or vesico-uterine fistula, the patient will have continence of urine because the urine may be held at the level of uterine isthmus. What is menorrhea? Cyclical hematuria at the time of menstruation is present. In which type of fistulas menorrhea will be there? So the menstrual blood is coming out through the urine. Menorrhea, cyclical hematuria at the time of menstruation is present in which type of fistulas? Uterine fistulas or vesico-uterine fistulas. That is communication between the uterus and bladder, and or communication between the uterus and urethra. Then because of this constant leakage of urine, there will be pruritus vulvae and peritoneal skin irritation and fungal infections due to constant wetness. So these are the symptoms in case of vesico-vaginal fistula. So in the general examination, height of the patient is important. Short stature, CPD may be there, resulting in obstructed labor. In parabdominal examination, you look for the surgical scars, that is previous cesarean section or laparotomy or pelvic surgeries or any surgeries. Then on vulval inspection, you see escape of watery discharge per vaginum of ammonical smell is characteristic. So if you do perspeculum examination, you will see the watery discharge with offensive urinary smell is escaping per vaginum. And there, because of constant wetting, there is soddening and excoriation of the vulval skin is there, and various degrees of perineal tears may be present. On perspiculum examination, the examination must be done in Sims position, that is left lateral position, with lower leg extended and the upper leg is drawn into the onto the abdomen. And with the Sims speculum, we have to examine. So the Sims speculum, with the Sims speculum, you retract the posterior vaginal wall and inspect the anterior vaginal wall for any fistula openings and for leaking. So you look for the fistula openings and any pooling of fluid in the vagina, you have to note. And if you see the fistulas, you note the site where it is located. Is it high vagina or mid vagina or lower part? And size. What is the size? That is diameter 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters or 6 centimeters. And number of fistulas also you note. And you assess the quality of the surrounding tissue. That is, any induration is there, and tissue mobility. And bladder mucosa may be visibly prolapsed through the big fistulas. So this is the Sims position, and with the Sims speculum, you retract the posterior vaginal wall and look at the anterior vaginal wall for the fistulas. When is very small fistula is there, there is only puckered area of the vaginal mucosa will be there. So when the woman coughs, we see the bubbles are seen coming through the fistulas. So very tiny fistula, if the patient coughs, we see the bubbles coming out through the fistula's opening. And in the paravaginal examination, you palpate the anterior and posterior vaginal walls for the puckering of the skin and dense adhesions, and it gives better, you can palpate the fistulas and you can assess the tissue mobility, size, site, and determination of the degree of tissue inflammation. That is, induration will be there if there is infection is there. Then edema of the tissues and any infection is there, you can note by paravaginal examination. So you have to do the general examination, then perspiculum examination in Sims position, and paravaginal examination you have to see. Confirmation of diagnosis is by dye test, double dye test, and triple swab test. Dye test is methylene blue dye, which is blue color, is introduced into the bladder by a catheter. A catheter is introduced into the bladder and bladder is filled with methylene blue dye. So dye is seen coming through the opening in the anterior vaginal wall. So that is called as dye test. Then what is 3 swab test or tampon test of Moid? Then another test. So this is 3 swab test. 3 swab test is 3 separate sponge swabs. So these are 3 separate sponge swabs are placed in the vagina, one above the other. So 3 sponge swabs are kept in the vagina. The bladder is filled through the catheter with methylene blue dye, and the patient is asked to do some exertional maneuvers, and the swabs are removed after 10 minutes. Swabs are kept, 3 swabs are kept in the vagina, and methylene blue dye is bladder is filled with methylene blue dye. So after 10 minutes, these 3 swabs were removed. So if you see the upper swab, that is topmost swab, is discolored with blue color. It is vesico-vaginal fistula. Then if the uppermost swab is wetted but not discolored, here it is wrongly given. This uppermost swab is wetted but it is not discolored with blue color. Then the communication is between the ureter and the vagina, that is ureterovaginal fistula. Sometimes there is only discoloration of the lowermost swab and upper 2 swabs remain dry. Then the communication is between the urethra and the vagina, that is ureterovaginal fistula. So in the 3 swab test, uppermost swab is discolored with blue color, then it is vesicovaginal fistula. Then uppermost swab is wetted but not discolored, then it is ureterovaginal fistula. If the upper two swabs are dry and not dry, but the lowermost swab is wetted blue, then it is ureterovaginal fistula. You remember this test. These three swab tests are methylene blue test. It will come as short question. Then coming to double dye test. Double dye test name itself is self-explanatory. That is, two dyes are used. The patient is given oral phenazopyridine. So because of this pyridium, there will be red colored urine will be produced. And simultaneously, you fill the bladder with blue colored solution, that is methylene blue solution, and insert a tampon in the vagina. So orally, you give phenazopyridine. So from the kidneys, there will be red colored urine will be produced coming through the ureters, and bladder is filled with blue colored dye, that is methylene blue. So and a tampon or a swabs are kept in the vagina. If there is vesicovaginal fistula, what will happen? If there is a communication between the vagina and the bladder or vagina and the urethra, there will be bluish staining of the tampon. But if there is red staining of the tampon, it suggests ureterovaginal fistula. Okay, that is called double dye test. Then another one is direct visualization. After passing metal catheter, you pass the metal catheter through the external urethral meatus into the bladder. You see that this metal catheter is coming out through the fistulous opening in the vagina. And then examination under anesthesia to palpate the fistulas and number and size. So this is the metal catheter coming out through the vaginal opening. So what are the investigations you have to do? In the vaginal vault, fluid has to be collected. In the vaginal vault, the watery fluid will be collected. No, so that is tested for urea, creatinine, and potassium to know whether it is urine or not. You will know by testing for urea, creatinine, and potassium. And to determine the likelihood of diagnosis of vaginicovaginal fistula and to rule out any vaginitis, any infection is there, you have to collect the vaginal vault fluid and send for these examinations. Then urine is sent for culture and sensitivity. If the fistulous tract will be there, no, so biopsy from the edge has to be taken if there is any suspicious of malignancy. Radio imaging studies like intravenous urography. So intravenous urography is for the diagnosis of ureterovaginal fistula. Then retrograde pyelography is done if the IVP is negative and there is high suspicion of ureterovaginal fistulas. And cystography in case of complex fistulas, when there is any communication with the rectum, ureter are involved, if there is any suspicion is there, you ask for cystography. Then sinography is you inject a dye through the fistulous opening and you take the films. That is sinography or fistulography for intestinogenital fistulas. Then HSG may be asked, hysterosalpingography may be asked for diagnosis of vesico-uterine fistulas. That is communication between the uterus and bladder. You inject the dye, radio opaque dye through the cervix into the uterus. So that dye will be seen escaping through the fistulous opening into the bladder. Then you ask for ultrasound, CT and MRI for in case of complex fistulas. So we will continue. So what are the investigations? With the 3 swab test, you can differentiate the level of fistulas, that is whether it is uretrovaginal fistula or then by IVP is to detect the uretrovaginal fistula, that is communication between the ureter and vagina, IVP. Then retrograde pylography is also to locate the exact size of uretrovaginal fistula. Cystography is if the diagnosis is uncertain, even with IVP and retrograde pylography, you ask for cystography to locate the site of this vesicouterine fistulas. Then sinography for genito, that is genitourinary fistulas, and also with the intestines if there is fistula communication. Hysterosalpingography for vesicouterine fistulas. Then you ask for ESG, CT, MRI in case of complex fistulas. And cystourethroskopy is for locating the site of fistulas in relation to ureteric orifice. Then examination under anesthesia has to be done to identify the small fistulas. And you ask for complete urine analysis, urine for culture and sensitivity, and also for kidney function test. So this is the cystoscope. Cystoscope introduced through the urethra and visualizing the bladder for any openings, that is any fistulous tracts. So this is how the fistulous opening looks through the cystoscope. So this is the cystogram. The radio opaque dye is introduced into the bladder and the X-ray films were taken. So you can see this is bladder, and you can see the radio opaque dye is extravasating from bladder into the vaginal canal. So this is cystogram or cystography. So what are the various diagnostic procedures for vesicovaginal fistula is through the cystoscopic examination for direct visualization of the fistula, and then cystoscopic examination using a carbon dioxide gas, that is called as flat tire test, that is collapsed tire appearance will be there if you see under the cystoscope examination. Combined vaginoscopy and cystoscopy. Simultaneously, you pass a vaginoscope through the vagina and cystoscope through into the bladder. And if you can see the transillumination of the bladder and vagina by turning off the vaginal and bladder lights. So you can imagine 2 tubes are passed, one through the vagina and one through the bladder. And when you switch off the light in the vagina, if the fistula is there, you can see the illumination of the light from the adjacent scope. Then color Doppler ultrasonography with contrast medium of the urinary bladder in cases where the cystoscopic evaluation is equivocal. So when you are uncertain about the diagnosis, you can ask for color Doppler ultrasonography using the contrast medium. Then fistulograms are indicated if conservative therapies are planned. So coming to management, prevention is how do you prevent the obstetrical fistulas and how will you plan to prevent the ureteric fistulas. Obstetric fistulas can be prevented by adequate antenatal care, identification of the high risk cases like short statured women, women with CPD, big baby, and then you can prevent, you can use the partogram and you can easily identify any cases of prolonged labor, and by proper care obstructed labor is prevented. And then continuous bladder drainage in suspicious cases, and the woman who has gone into obstructed labor or difficult deliveries or with forceps deliveries or craniotomy, then you can advise continuous bladder drainage for 5 to 7 days. Then ureteric fistulas, intravenous urogram, that is during surgeries, when you are doing any abdominal surgery or pelvic surgery, when with the high risk cases like women who has undergone radiation or cases of endometriosis or previous surgeries or PID cases, you can place the ureteral catheter. So you can identify the ureter by prior catheterization, so that you can avoid injury to the ureter. And direct visualization and palpation of the ureter, and by uric glow dye. This is the recent one where this uric glow dye is injected, so that the ureter will be illuminating, that is with other color, so that you can avoid injuring the ureter. So adequate care must be taken to avoid injury during operative procedures. So prevention of this obstacle fistulas is by proper antenatal care and increasing the age of the marriage and nutritional diet since childhood. And then primary prevention is by availability of the family planning procedures and by proper uses of the partogram. So after the woman had obstructed labor, we have done any destructive procedure. So if you are suspecting any fistula, how will you manage? So you have to insert an indwelling catheter with continuous bladder drainage for 5 to 7 days. Patient has to take adequate fluids and early mobilization. And after 7 to 10 days, examine her anterior vaginal wall in Sims position with the speculum to look for any fistulas. So if you are suspecting any fistula, then you advise continuous bladder drainage for 5 days. Then you inspect after 7 to 10 days for anterior vaginal wall for any fistulas opening. If her bladder is still bruised and necrosed, leave the catheter for 6 weeks, they say. So surgery fistulas, how will you prevent? Adequate exposure during surgery. Then minimize the bleeding and hematoma formation and dissection in the correct planes, and wide mobilization of the bladder so that the bladder is not involved in the suture lines. And sometimes we may ask for intraoperative retrograde filling of the bladder and cystourethropy during surgery to note any injuries to the bladder. Coming to management of vesico-vaginal fistulas, it can be divided into conservative management, medical therapy, surgical therapy, and non-surgical intervention. Conservative management is planned in case of simple fistulas of less than 1 centimeter size, which are diagnosed within 7 days after of surgery, and it is not due to carcinoma or radiation. Then you advise only you keep the continuous bladder drainage for about 6 weeks, 30 days to 6 weeks, so that these small fistulas will heal spontaneously. If the fistula decreases in size, then you advise drainage for additional 2 to 3 weeks. But if there is no improvement within 30 days, she may need surgery. So for small fistulas, you advise continuous bladder drainage for 4 weeks. If the size of the fistula decreases, then 2 more weeks for the complete resolving of the fistulas. If there is no improvement, she may need surgery, and this surgery has to be done after 3 months. So after conservative management, medical management. So estrogen replacement therapy in case of postmenopausal women, to improve the vascularization and healing, we advise estrogen therapy, local estrogen cream application. And 2 to 4 grams are placed pervaginally at bedtime for 4 to 6 weeks. Then acidification of the urine to decrease the risks of cystitis and bladder calculi formation, and vitamin C also she can take. Then antibiotics and situ bath and barrier ointment such as zinc oxide or Vaseline application in treatment of perineal and ammonical dermatitis. Non-surgical intervention is you can apply electrocautery fulguration of the fistula. So if the fistula is very small in size, that is pinhole opening, you can just apply electrocautery fulguration so that spontaneous healing will occur by fibrosis formation. Fibrin glue can be applied in case of small fistulas. Then laser welding with Nd:Arc laser. So this is also option is available where with the Nd:Arc laser, fulguration and transurethral catheter for 3 weeks. These are the non-surgical interventions for fistulas. Then surgical procedures can be depending upon the approach. The approach can be vaginal approach or abdominal approach or combined approach. Vaginal approach, the procedures are flap splitting method and saucerization and Latchko procedure and Choyer-Moyer technique. So these are the vaginal techniques. That is through the vaginal approach, we do these procedures. Flap splitting method, saucerization, Latchko procedure and Moyer's technique. Abdominal approach is transabdominal approach. It can be transperitoneal. That is through the after opening the abdomen through the peritoneal cavity, you do the repair. Or transvesical, that is the bladder is open and through the bladder you do the repair. That is transperitoneal and transvesical approach. So what is flap splitting operation? So this is the anterior vaginal wall and this is the fistulous opening. So you give a circular incision around the fistula and is 2 small longitudinal cuts were made upwards and downwards. These vaginal epithelium is separated from the underlying bladder tissues. So it is 2 flaps were created. So mobilization, these flaps were sutured. This is called as flap splitting procedure. So here you can see this is the fistulous opening where a circular incision is given around this and vagina is separated from the underlying bladder tissues and this opening in the bladder is sutured in 2 layers and then you suture this vaginal hole in the vagina. This is called as flap splitting technique. Then Latchko procedure. It is done in case of post-hysterectomy fistulas. And it is a vaginal method of repair where you identify the fistula opening, the surrounding vaginal epithelium is denuded, that is removed, and the edge is freshened, and these wide raw surfaces are sutured with non-absorbable suture material. This is called as Latchko procedure, which we do for post-hysterectomy cases. But here it leads to narrowing of the upper vagina and atresia. So this is the after hysterectomy, the vaginal cuff will be there and there is fistulous opening where it is the tissues around this fistulous opening are denuded and the edges are made raw and they are sutured in layers. This is called as Latchko procedure. So coming to Sims operation or saucerization operation. This is the original Sims-Marion technique. Dr. Marion Sims, he has described this procedure or saucerization. What is Sims triad? That is the patient in Sims position using the Sims speculum for visualization of the fistula and using a silver wire, special silver wire. These 3 are called as Sims triad for repair of the vesico-vaginal fistulas. So small fistulas or any residual fistulas we can do this saucerization. That is like a saucer, like that cup. The tissues were excised and sutured with the silver wire. Silver wire nowadays you can use the non-absorbable suture material. Then coming to vaginal approach, split flap technique, then saucerization and Latchko procedure. Then abdominal approach is, in which cases you go for abdominal approach is for high fistulas which are inaccessible through the vaginal route and multiple fistulas are there, and when there is involvement of the uterus and bowels and there is need for ureteral reimplantation into the bowel and complex fistulas and associated with pelvic pathology and as a result of radiation, you go for abdominal approach. So the abdominal repair can be through the transvesical repair. That is through you open the bladder and you repair it through the bladder. That is transvesical repair. Transperitoneal is through the peritoneal opening we do it. Combined repair is through both these approaches. That is transperitoneal and transvesical approach. You repair these fistula tract. So when there is extensive loss of bladder tissue and there is previous repetitive failure, and that is the fistula repair you have done and that is failed, the surgery is failed, or radiation fistulas. These cases may need urinary diversion. That is implantation of the ureters into the sigmoid colon, where the ileal loop bladder is created into which the ureters are implanted. You just remember urinary diversion surgeries for extensive bladder tissue loss and repetitive failures and radiation fistulas. So you can you will implant these ureters into the sigmoid colon after creating this ileal loop bladder. Then rectal bladder, that is terminal sigmoid colon, is brought out as a colostomy and distal end of the rectosigmoid is sutured and closed so that the ureters are implanted into the rectum. That is called as rectal bladder. So these urinary diversion can be into a ileal loop bladder, that is into the ileal loop. These ureters are implanted, or into the sigmoid colon, terminal part of the sigmoid colon, the rectal bladder. Then ureters are implanted into this terminal rectal pouch, that is which acts as the bladder receptacle. The complications can be from that the ascending infection into the GI tract, and then electrolyte imbalance resulting in hyperchloremic acidosis, stricture at the site of implantation, resulting in closure. So this is the placement of the omental flap in between the bladder and the vagina. So after the repair, these fistula tract, these two flaps were separated and sutured. Then to prevent the failure rates or recurrence, they will place the omental flap. This is the omentum. So this omental flap is placed in between this, so that the repair will be successful. So second attempt fistula repair, that is once you have repaired fistula and that is failed, that is fistula is not closed, then when will you plan for second attempt of fistula repair? It is after 3 months. So when the fistula is caused by CA cervix, it may require anterior exenteration of the bladder. Then if the fistula is located in the vaginal vault following hysterectomy, it will be high above. Then there will be difficulty in repairing of the fistulas. So what is the post-operative management? The patient requires continuous bladder drainage for 10 to 14 days, and the adequate urinary output must be there. That is 100 ml per hour must be there. We give antibiotics and plenty of fluids for continuous bladder drainage, and you look for bladder block and fluid balance. So in the post-operative period, you advise the patient to take adequate fluids so that they will pass the urine frequently and avoid intercourse for at least 3 months. And if she conceives, they have to defer the pregnancy for at least one year. If she conceives, what is the mode of delivery? A patient who has undergone repair of vesico-vaginal fistula, if she conceives, the management in the delivery is by elective cesarean section, and that too by you have to give incision in the upper segment. Classical incision you have to give. So coming to ureterovaginal fistulas. The injury of the ureter during gynecological operations can occur during hysterectomy. So during hysterectomy, the ureter will be at a distance of only 0.5 centimeters from the uterine artery. So while applying clamps for the uterine vessels, if you go laterally, there is every chance of injuring the ureter. So that is one step where you should be very cautious. So always you apply clamps onto the uterus, but not laterally, because the ureter is very nearer. It is only 0.5 distance, 0.5 centimeters away from the uterine artery. So ureter may be injured during hysterectomy, or she will develop or following the any difficult labors. So it will lead to incomplete incontinence. That is what I told already. The urine from the affected ureter will escape from the vagina, and patient will have constant uh, involuntary passes of urine. But the normal ureter will be there, no, that will fill the bladder, and she will empty normally from the other ureter. So it is always small and high up in the vagina, and the location will be lateral. In the lateral walls, you will see this fistulas opening and leaking also. You can see at the vault and at the lateral parts. So it has to be differentiated from the vesico-vaginal fistula by methylene blue dye test. So if you inject the methylene blue dye into the bladder, you fill the bladder with methylene blue dye, and you keep the tampons in the vaginal wall, you will see non-staining. Because if it is a vesico-vaginal fistula, from the bladder with the methylene blue dye, that will escape into the vagina and that will stain the tampon. By cystoscopy, that is the cystoscope is introduced into the bladder, and you can see the ureteric efflux on one side only, because on the damaged side you cannot see this ureteric efflux. So prophylaxis is ureteric injuries can be avoided by preoperative intravenous pyelography, ureteric catheterization, and proper surgical technique and uroglow. Then once you identify the ureteric fistula, ureteric damage during surgery, what is the principles of management? So you should not to damage the ureteric sheath and its blood supply. Then ureteric mobilization and tension-free anastomosis must be applied. Watertight closure and a stent with ureteric catheter must be kept, and passive drain at the anastomotic site to prevent the urine granuloma. The ureter receives its blood supply from the laterally from the blood vessels. It receives its blood supply, and ureteric sheath also is highly vascular. So you should not damage the ureteric sheath. Otherwise, if the sheath is stripped, so there will be blood supply will be deranged, and avascular necrosis and ureteric fistulas develop. So then ureteric mobilization must be important. So there is so that tension-free anastomosis can be applied and healing will be better. So treatment of ureterovaginal fistulas is abdominal reimplantation of ureter into the bladder. The ureter is mobilized and reimplanted into the bladder. If it is not possible, then the ureter is transplanted into the sigmoid colon or ileal loop. Then if kidney function is very poor on the affected side because of ascending infection or obstruction, the kidney has to be sacrificed. So you should remember, most common fistulas in developing countries is obstetric fistulas, the vesico-vaginal fistula. Whereas in developed countries, it is because of surgeries, gynecological surgery. Most common fistula is ureterovaginal fistulas. Then identification of high risk cases is important. That is short-statured women, forceps application, then obstructed labors, they must be identified. Then women with previous surgeries, endometriosis, radiation, any pelvic malignancies, that is like CA cervix, CA vagina, and radiotherapy. Following radiotherapy, they are the high risk cases. PID cases also, they are the high risk cases, identification must be done, and utmost care must be taken during the pelvic procedure, like mobilization of the bladder, identification of the ureters, and application of the suture lines. We should be very careful. And if any injury is there, that must be which are identified during the procedure. That is, bladder is opened during the procedure, it has to be immediately repaired. And also proper drainage of the urine by continuous bladder drainage for 6 weeks. Then if detected following the procedure, that is on the first post operative day, you have patient came with dribbling of urine, then you advise CBD for 10 to 14 days for the spontaneous closure of the fistula opening. If it fails, surgery has to be planned after 3 months. So these days you should remember. So vesico uterine fistulas, that is communication between the bladder and the uterus, the patient will have cyclic hematuria. This is called as Yusuf syndrome. Then in case of uretrovaginal fistula, there is double stream urine. That is, through the urethra she will pass urine, and also through the vagina she will pass urine. That is called as double stream urine. So you may get a 4 marks question regarding this rectovaginal fistula. So vesicovaginal fistula and rectovaginal fistulas are frequently repeated 4 marks questions. So what is rectovaginal fistula? This is the communication between the rectum and the vagina, between the intestine and the genital tract. So rectovaginal fistula is an abnormal communication between the rectum and vagina with involuntary escape of flatus or feces into the vagina, resulting in fecal incontinence. It is a socially disabling condition because the patient will have incontinence of the fecal matter. She cannot move in the society. So what are the causes for this rectovaginal fistula? The same things what we have discussed. Congenital, which is very rare. Congenital rectovaginal fistula is very rare. Traumatic fistulas can occur due to obstetrical traumas like obstructed labor, prolonged labor, then forceps delivery, resulting in necrosis obstetric fistulas or traumatic obstetric fistulas. Then surgical traumas and direct trauma in road traffic accidents with crush injuries of the pelvis. Then as a result of inflammatory diseases like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, and malignancies, carcinoma of the cervix, vagina and vulva, then radiation necrosis. Infections like lymphogranulovenereum and genital tuberculosis, inflammatory bowel diseases like Crohn's disease of the lower bowel and rectum, and ulcerative colitis. In Crohn's disease, the chances is more when compared to ulcerative colitis. Then diverticulitis of the sigmoid colon, resulting in abscess formation and which will burst into the vagina, also results in rectovaginal fistula. So evaluation of the case is with what complaint the patient will present. The patient presents with involuntary escape of air or flatus or feces into the vagina. If the fistula is very small, the incontinence of the flatus is there with loose stools only, but not with hard stools. That is, the patient complains that air is coming through the vagina. Air is coming out through the vagina, but if the patient has loose stools, that will come out through that small opening, fistulous opening, but hard stools will not come through that vagina. Whereas foul smelling vaginal discharge with periodic uncontrolled escape of gas will be the complaint. So it appears immediately or 7 to 10 days after the delivery. On rectovaginal examination, you can see the fistulous opening in the posterior vaginal wall. You can see the number, size and site of the fistulas. You have to assess the surrounding tissue for any inflammation, edema, and also mobility of the tissues. Then contraction of the puborectalis muscle and external anal sphincters must be assessed, and perineal body must be examined. So this is the posterior vaginal wall where you are seeing the fistulous opening. A confirmation is by a thin probe is passed from the vagina through this fistulous tract, which will come out through the rectum or anal canal. Methylene blue dye test is if you pass this methylene blue dye, that will come out through the that will stain the tampon kept in the vagina. Then air bubble is seen in the saline filled vagina after insertion of air into the rectum through Foley's catheter. So rectum is, Foley's catheter is introduced into the rectum and air is pushed, and saline, that is water, is pushed into the vaginal wall, and when air is pushed through the Foley's catheter which is kept in the rectum, you can see the air bubble coming through this fistulous opening. Then examination under anesthesia to directly visualize and palpate these fistulas. So investigations are by barium enema, you can see the fistulous tract, and gastrographin enema, barium mill studies, and sigmoidoscopy and proctoscopy, and with biopsy, CT scan, MRI and ultrasound. These are the tests we ask for. So classification depending upon the location, they can be high, mid position or low, or simple or complex fistulas depending upon the size and associated complications. They can be divided into simple or complex. So management is preoperative management and postoperative management is very important for healing of this rectovaginal fistula. Doing surgery is not complicated or difficult for rectovaginal fistula, but preoperative preparation and postoperative management is very important for healing. You may do the surgery very nicely, but if you don't give the proper postoperative management, that won't heal. Okay. Then rectal enema is given for 3 to 4 days, for 3 days before the surgery, and low residue fluid, patient has to take low residue fluid diet for 7 days before the surgery. Then an intestinal antiseptics like neomycin is given. Then vaginal douchings are advised. So this is the pre-operative preparation. The surgeries can be loss and trait operation for repair of rectovaginal fistula in the lower 1/3 of the vagina, where this is the fistulous opening, and this fistula is converted into a 4th degree perineal tear. The 4th degree perineal tear is involvement of the rectal mucosa. The perineal tear which involves the rectal mucosa is called as 4th degree perineal tear. So this fistulous tract will be there now from vagina to rectum. This tissue is cut open so that it is converted into a 4th degree perineal tear, and this is sutured in layers with the non-absorbable suture material. So you prepare notes regarding vesicovaginal fistula, ureterovaginal fistula and rectovaginal fistula, which may come as 4 marks questions. The etiology is same, and once or twice if you read, you can understand. If you understand the concept, you can write this etiology same for these 3 things, that is obstetric causes, gynecological causes, surgical causes, then traumatic causes. Then what are the tests, investigations, and the tests, what are the tests we do for confirmation of diagnosis and management. Okay, and you have to remember for vesicovaginal fistula, you have to remember the conservative methods, non-surgical interventions, and also surgical methods, that is vaginal approach and abdominal approach. In the vaginal approach, the Sims operation or saucerization, then slit flap technique, then Lajko procedure, and for abdominal approach, transperitoneal approach and transvesical approach, and then combined approach. If you read, it is very easy and you can write this. You don't think that if you get a question on rectovaginal fistula, it is out of portion. It is frequently repeated questions. Okay, thank you.